crossing my fingers to see if it was going to work and work properly. So I will warn you, James, there's something I experienced the other day, which is that people could hear me, but the video was freezing off and on. So it might be the case that we're going to see that again.
Okay, I'm ready for anything.
You're ready for anything? Okay, good. So I've got us there. And if you wanted, you could put up the YouTube as well if you wanted to look at the chat. I mean, as if you want something else to distract you while we're on. But I try my very best to keep track of what's going on in the chat plus everything else. Okay, live now. I'm sharing our link out on social media, so you can go ahead and pick it up, and then you can read the chat along with. And there we are, live now. And oh, look what I need to do. I see what I need to do right now in our meeting, which is give us a gallery view. There we are. I think we're up and running. Welcome, James.
I can even do that. See?
Are you there? Are you on YouTube? You have the technology?
I am there. I am. I'm there.
Okay. What you'll have to do maybe is mute that particular tab so that you don't get the sound in your ear.
Right.
So up in the tab itself in your browser, you have to do that. Okay. So we have to do that because there is this 20-second delay, but for everybody else, they don't have to do it. They've just got their thing. So we will see. There are some people starting to come in. What I can do also is I can share it a couple other places and we'll be ready to go. So yeah, my title, everybody, this COVID-induced dysbiosis is inspired by two things. As you know, I've been dealing with all this healing from gut issues. I've talked with James, and James has had some gut issues. In fact, he was saying he was having a little bit of problem this morning. I hope you're feeling okay, James.
I'm feeling okay.
Okay.
It's my standard GI stuff, I'm okay. Yes.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit of that with dysbiosis in particular. But then the reason the title became what it was because of a brilliant Twitter thread from Timothy Sandifer. It's a very long thread, and I went ahead and shared and responded on my Twitter feed. But I'm going to also assemble some program notes probably while we're live, just for fun and extra behind the scenes sausage, as it's called sometimes. You guys can watch me do that, but I'm pretty decent at it, so I can multitask. Females can multitask like amazing, supposedly,
much better
too.
Than men, yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's the don't tell anybody. It's probably really not that true. But in any event, we'll be doing this. But yeah, it was inspired by this thread, and it was talking about the economy. So that if you think you can just sort of like shut off and turn on the whole economy, like if you're a Trump or any other wannabe autocrat, you can't do this. Yeah. And so when you say, oh, well, we're going to shut down for a little while, everything but the quote essential services, and you're going to deem which ones are what, when you shut down certain things, it's sort of like antibiotics and other things that we take that destroy little parts of our microbiome in our gut. And you've killed off that section forever, maybe, or you've killed it off in such a way that it's going to be very difficult to bring back. And so this is where the analogy and my inspiration for the title came. And
it's brilliant. No, and what he's getting at is a thing that really disturbs me, I think, the most about this whole COVID experience that we're having. It is an exposure of, well, what Ayn Rand said so brilliantly in Atlas Shrugged, how people are blind, utterly blind to the importance, the life-giving necessity of economic activity.
Yes.
And the utter blindness they have, the goods are here mentality, or I can simply order a company, GM to manufacture something or 3M to manufacture something, and just order it, and that'll fix, and there's no other economic consequences, right? The whole idea of taking the producer for granted, invisible, the life-sustaining. I mean, these characters, it's what's disturbing is that you've got it both on the left. You've got all these leftists who are saying, oh, just opening up, Trump says he wants to open up the economy again. What he's doing is he's putting corporations ahead of lives. He's putting profits ahead of your grandmother's survival.
Right.
That is utter and complete blindness, because they cannot see that without a thriving, vibrant economy, we can't make respirators. We can't have the medical technology that we're
Right.
assuming to get us through all this, just for openers, just for openers. Forget every other aspect of, and you can see this mentality. It pervades, as we've seen, in lots and lots of areas. It's Mike Bloomberg saying, "I'm going to get, yeah, I made a lot of money, but I'm giving it all away." He said during the debate, remember, as if his productive activities with, Bloomberg News Service
Right.
wasn't his real contribution to poverty and the well-being of humanity.
Yes.
And you see this over and over and over, this total blindness. And of course, it's the way we're trained in universities. But there's also the doctors. You'll hear Dr. Fauci in the press conference, for example. When will this be over? Well, when there's 0 deaths. 0 deaths. And that's it. Dr. Fauci has.
Okay. So, but was he saying it'll be over in the sense of we need to have a total lockdown until that time? I don't know. Is he saying that? I don't know if he's
The
saying
question that was asked, just to set it up, the context, he
Okay.
implied that. Now, of course, he also
Wow.
says in the next breath, right, I'm not the final decision maker on these things. But if you ask me, in other words, we should be closed down until there's no more deaths from COVID-19. It's astonishing. It brings
Yeah,
out
that is really truly divorced from reality then, right?
totally.
Because what you're starting to see, and I'm on board with this now, like especially I was sharing out there the other day it was sort of an indirect link to a tweet that had a video of Newsom, and I'm calling him Gruesome Newsom, and I'm not the first to have called him Gruesome Newsom. I won't be the last. He has repulsed me in everything that I've seen when he's doing his little press conferences around this emergency. And it is an emergency, but he's just glomming onto it. And somebody fed him a softball leading question, basically saying, isn't this an excuse to enact the whole progressive agenda? And he was all over it. And someone was, when I posted the indirect link on my social media, one of my friends was saying, well, are you sure it's a direct quote? Because there's a lot of times people are exaggerating and
Oh
everything
no,
else.
there are members of Congress who've said the same thing.
Oh, I'm sure. But the point is,
Clyburn, yeah.
is the governor of California really doing this? So I
No.
went and I watched that video. I actually took one for whoever cares. Is there a team anymore? I don't know. But he was, just shockingly blatant about his optimism in basically using this crisis as a pretense for having this whole progressive turn in California. And he was talking about income inequality and all this. And like, this is going to be the thing that's going to allow him to, take the power that he needs to eliminate income inequality and all these other evils, according to his quote, progressivism. It was scary. It was really scary. And then another thing that I shared out this morning, again, if I sit here and assemble the notes while we're doing this, maybe I'll do it. But New York Times had a headline where they're basically sounding the alarm. They're saying autocrats all over the world are using this as a reason to grab power. Will they ever give it up after the crisis is over? Fauci, I don't know much about Fauci. I know he's worked, under both administrations and that he's a good scientist who's respected by Amish Adalja. He probably has no sense for politics at all.
Right.
And he might be very biased towards doing
And
whatever it takes to get rid of the
and
number.
I'll forgive technical
But people
wonks
are
like
going to
that.
die when there's something like this. And so there's got to be an adequate balance. But all of this is to say, I have to announce, right? So I've been in favor of some sort of a limited lockdown. Like I would even support a government limited lockdown if government upheld its end of the bargain, which was to do the mea culpa, to get out of the way. And insofar as they're doing anything, it's only doing a fast track towards getting us to a very tailored response to this, where you have only where necessary people are in any kind of a lockdown mode, and you're just narrowly tailoring it and getting the people out with clear exit strategies, et cetera. And I am not seeing that from any government agency anywhere, probably.
Look, if someone wants to wear a hazmat suit to work, they still can't go to work. That's just insane. We're
Yes.
the entire focus, I would have to say, of this lockdown has, first of all, as we were saying last time, this whole thing is caused by government, and
Yeah.
we have not got the proper mea culpa, because the proper mea culpa would implicitly come with all the deregulation, because most of the good that the government has done in the past 2 months has been deregulation, getting out of the way. The FDA and the CDC were the culprits behind not having proper testing and enough tests out there, which of course destroyed any hope we had, any chance we had for a more restrained response. But even if it has to be a broader response, does it have to be a one size fits all, no options? You know, reading about how Sweden has reacted to this versus the way we react to this, it's clear to me that the Swedish government has a whole lot more faith in the simple common sense selfishness of their own people
Yes.
than we do.
Yes.
The businesses weren't closed down. Restaurants are still open.
Yep.
They're very thin. They don't have the same business, but they may survive. You see, what's astonishing is that most people are taking the advice of government, and people. So you see, the streets are empty and the restaurants have thin business, but people were not at a point of a gun told this is what you have to do. All businesses must close down, no matter what. No options, no alternatives, no ifs, ands, or buts. You know, this more nuanced approach that Trump is taking should have probably been the approach we were taking from the beginning. You know, we'll never know if any of this has really done much, was worth it. Let me put it this way, was worth it at the end of the day, when you compare lives to lives, even whether this was.
Well, okay, so we may have an indication, and it's too early to tell, but we started with a lockdown somewhat early-ish here in California,
Yeah.
and the numbers maybe are more encouraging than a place like New York. But you could also argue that the difference between what's going on in New York and California is due to the fact that here we all have to use our cars, and so we're in separate vehicles, and it's mass public transportation where everyone is in close, not
Boy,
very well ventilated
it's the
space.
concentration of people in the greater New York area. I lived in New York City
Yeah.
for a while, and you just can't avoid, if you're out and about, you just can't avoid close contact with a bunch of people if you live in Manhattan or something.
No, exactly. I mean, even just going for a daily walk out there right now and trying to keep your 6 feet of distance.
Right, is a challenge. I mean, in a place
Yeah.
that has millions of people, and Manhattan Island is, just several miles by a couple miles wide, it's just so concentrated. I have to think that it's the population density in New York City.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if their draconian lockdown has, any effect, or if something they could detect as effect. Because I'm not.
Well, I would say that New York was late in doing theirs is the
Right,
problem, right?
right, right.
So by the time they did theirs, I think here we may have done it in time to actually have it have an effect. But in New York, it seems like everybody had already sort of infected each other.
I have to tend to think that it's for example, that we're a car culture and they have a lot more concentration. I'm
Yeah.
not sure the lockdown was the difference in California because, well,
No,
frankly,
I think both, probably both
it's only
are at
been
play.
it frankly has been only in recent days that I have seen, maybe the last week, that I have seen dramatically people in this area just not going out or wearing masks when they do go to the
Yeah.
store. Um,
Yeah. And see, well, now we're going to have a lot more masks because the whole thing about masks has changed. And that's one thing that is, you have to use some caution. I'm not sure how much, that all of the back and forth about what is true and what is not true about this is just media hype and
Oh,
just,
wait,
or
all other things from the outset, just common sense. All other things being equal, are you safer with the mask? You're certainly safer in spreading it, and you may have a marginal benefit in not getting it.
sure.
So, and all that talk about, hey, putting on the mask and putting off the mask means you're touching well, so long as you're a little aware of that, and washing your hands and aware of that very
Yeah.
issue. No, what the issue always was prioritizing them to the medical personnel that needed them, that we
Right.
had a shortage of them. And of
Right.
course, whenever there's an economic shortage, it's the government. It's probably some price control or it's almost certainly some regulation or price control that
Right.
would, whether it's toilet paper on the shelves or not. It's the anti-price gouging laws that cleared the shelves, right? It's price regulations that make the supply unavailable and keep the supply low.
Yeah.
You have Trump doing more madness, telling 3M that they've got to bring their masks. They have a whole bunch of masks in East Asia, apparently. Got to bring them all to America because you're an American company and you can only sell masks to Americans. Now, of course, that's hideously cruel when you think about America being a major supplier of medical equipment and people in Latin America and Asia needing. They, of course, need it right now. But of course, his economic nationalism comes down and tells 3M they've got to deliver those masks. 3M politely reminds the president that we're also importers of medical equipment and medicine, and that this in fact might reduce the total number of respirators that are available because other countries will retaliate. Absolute madness. And it shows both their authoritarian impulses and their failure to understand economics.
Exactly. No, it's exactly what it does. And so, you know, what is he doing? I mean, he's saying that he's scrambling because this crisis that he was in part responsible for creating is one that doesn't seem to kind of whip into shape according to his whim and solve itself. Right. And so he's going to go and try to bully and blame whoever he can. And if you are unlucky enough, like a 3M, to be making the supplies that are in dire need, then watch out, you're going to be one of the ones. It was interesting. So it's 3M and GM, the M somehow end up being the ones that he's been just like pounding on. But, you know, and then he's got to show everybody he's doing something, right? And he's being tough.
And that's the thing. And what they've conditioned our minds to thinking is that a government takeover and a draconian response is the proper response, right? The proper reaction to this.
I mean, listen, we hit 3M hard today. It's like,
God, these are the heroes making those masks and the respirator parts. I mean, it's insane. And not only that, what we should be doing right now is praising profit for the life-giving thing that it is. Yes. We should allow those companies to make huge profits so that there's all kinds of new production in masks and medical equipment. What, as any free market economist can tell you, what we need are the price signals to hit the producers and the consumers. If prices are allowed to go up on these things, they're allowed to gouge, in other words. That means that people will conserve. The consumer will cut back where he won't waste, right? And on the other hand, producers will have increased profits, and so everyone will go into the business of making masks and respirators, and we'll have more masks and respirators.
Yes, and naturally,
profit is life-giving. Yes. Profit is life-giving. Yes. And if America is in a better situation than most other countries, it's because we have a free market system. Well, to the extent
to some extent, that's part of the reason. Part of the reason that we're in this crisis,
right?
And that
we don't.
that in particular, we've talked about the atrophy of the medical services industry.
Oh, in particular.
It's horrible. Sick care system, like Rob Wolf likes to call it. No, his solution is to beat on 3M. But yeah, so 3M is an American company. No, it does not have a duty to sell only to Americans. But this is where he doesn't get it too, I think, is that I think he actually can't relate to having a natural concern for your fellow American, because I think his concern is only insofar as it's going to help him get reelected. That's my impression of him. But 3M naturally, as an American company, wants our people in our country to live and do well and continue to be customers of 3M.
They were working with Trump to try and get masks to the domestic market. But, if you point a gun at the very people who make it possible, who are producing it, the people that we need most right now are the people that we need to shackle and enslave.
I'm glad that they pointed out to him that there are things we might want from other nations too. He's got this idea that somehow we can just do everything here in the United States, and of course we can do it all immediately and just snap into conformity with his wishes. But even there are some things long term we do need to get from other places.
The assumption of his economic nationalism here is that he'd rather have foreigners die. It's just obvious on the face of it. There's no other way of looking at it. So if 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, can't supply medical supplies to foreign countries, and they have to give them all to the United States, what he's saying is that it's better foreigners die. right? And it's not even clear that it would improve, that we could get masks all the quicker to, and what difference it would make here either. So some marginal improvement here of our survival means everyone else in the world can suffer from a lack of U.S. medical supplies. It is,
No, and you might say,
I'm not an altruist, but that is cruel.
well, and think about this. So they've got to ramp up very quickly to do this.
Yeah.
And it could be the case that economies of scale, which includes selling to other buyers, right? Because here's the thing. Even if they said, okay, well, we're going to sell only to United States, there's still, believe it or not, limited to demand. Reason being, there's only limited resources to pay for those masks, right? So they've got to spread the revenue that they need to ramp all this up quickly. They have to get that, I think, from other places too.
Right.
You could say there's unlimited need, but is there unlimited demand in the sense of actually people willing to pay money to GM for this?
Right. Well, that's it. No, and it does, when the government uses the president uses his War Powers Act to command 3M or GM to do something, the command,
it's eminent domain, basically.
yeah, and it's a command that has no respect for actually the market forces. So the people that need the medical supplies most, the wisest investment in getting it to them, plus the ultimate total supply at the end of the day, all of that has got to be hurt by the command. In other words, it would be far more efficient to not have the command, let it go where it should, let the price rise, let the profit rise.
Let GM take advantage of economies of scale.
Take advantage. I feel like Hank Reardon in the press conference at Atlas Shrugged. What they should do is they should skin us alive, and that's the only way that we're going to survive. If you want to get medical supplies into the system, then allow for a free market, allow for profit, and understand the life-giving properties of profit in the medical business right now.
Yes.
So and of course, that's the very thing they're blind to.
Let me read to you. I want to get back to this thread of Tim Sandifer that inspired the title for today. It's not giving me the link to the thread that I want. Where is he? Okay, come on. I'm going to have to scroll, I guess, in a certain way. Is that what I have to do? Okay, I got it. Sorry. It's a long thread over on Twitter. He says, the economy is not a machine that can be turned off or on. It is an ecosystem. It can grow in many places. It can die in places. You can't freeze it for a month or whatever. He says, people still need goods and services. They must find ways to provide for their needs. That's the first tweet. So he says, you can't freeze it for just a month or whatever. I suspect you could freeze certain things for a few weeks and be okay, a very short time.
Every day that happens, business, anyone who's had experience in small business, who knows anyone who's struggled to make a small business go, knows that very frequently they're on the edge of death at any moment, especially in the beginning when they're surviving. Every single day that passes, more small businesses will go under and there'll be no future for them. That's it, over, boom. Because it's like a growing organism. If it doesn't get fed, especially at certain moments of its development, the poor thing dies, and everything else that would emanate from that will also not come into existence.
Well, and here's the analogy to the microbiome, right? Because one of the things we've talked about is the back and forth about the carnivore diet and et cetera. There's a lot of benefit to the carnivore diet in terms of resetting imbalances in the gut and sort of starving out bad bacteria. But you are also starving the good bacteria. And so one of the challenges that some people going on either that kind of restrictive diet or other types of restrictive diets, the challenges that they're facing, and I think I'm in this camp right now, I'm still a work in progress, is trying to repopulate certain kind of phylum, phyla is the plural, phyla of these species that are low or extinct because of either antibiotics or restrictive diet or whatever. So that's my analogy, right? Is that, every day that passes, it's either atrophying, or now it happens to be that these little bugs are supposedly fairly resilient. And so you can sort of starve them off for a little while and they can repopulate. But maybe it doesn't transfer completely over to an economy in that way. Like you say, there are certain small businesses that might go out of business forever with 2 more days passing, right?
And they all have suppliers who won't get the business now, and they all have employees who won't be employed now.
Yes.
It's a complex division of labor economy is what makes possible our technological response to COVID-19. If it weren't for the fact that we had a complex economy, just like I say, for openers, just our own response to this disease would be impossible, would be unthinkable if we were, some third world country living, in threat of famine every year. No,
Self-subsistence
self-sustaining.
farming or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't realize the life-giving properties of the for-profit productive activities all around us, and that blindness that starts in universities where it's conditioned into our young to not see the productive activities as anything, which will lead to a Barack Obama saying, "You didn't build that," right?
Yes.
This total blindness, just as Ayn Rand said, it's the producer in Atlas Shrugged who is invisible, right? He works by a process of blank out, and the goods are here. Boy, is this a vindication of
It's from you didn't build that to you won't build that,
right,
and then to build it now.
Right. And can't you? And why isn't it here? And it's your fault that it's not, because we need it now.
Yes, and that's the temper tantrum that Trump was having yesterday, and that's the one that I picked out and criticized him for. Oh, sorry, Trump fans. I'm so sorry I criticized Trump again for not adhering to anything resembling a free market philosophy.
He's not a free marketer. He doesn't understand the free market or production or appreciate the role of production. Even when it's the leftists, talk about taking one for the team. I subjected myself to listening to leftists talk about how Trump is killing people if he wants to partially open the economy. But even when Trump is saying, I want to partially open the economy, it doesn't look like he has any understanding of the real survival, life-sustaining properties.
No. It's never about that. It's about the stock market.
Right.
It's about his Pharaoh trade economy, right?
Oh, and he knows it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. Oh, he knows it. He knows it. Talk about total ignorance of how the economy works. And here, kudos to Mr.
Well,
Sanders.
he's also the one who said that COVID's going to mysteriously, just like a miracle, disappear at one point or something, right?
Exactly.
I haven't looked at all the quotations because I might vomit or something, but I've seen these going around. There's somebody who compiled a whole bunch of Trump quotations and put it as a response to one of my tweets. And I didn't even click on the graphic. I don't want to see. I'm being, a little bit selective about what I allow myself to watch on a daily basis because I get really anxious about this. This week, I have had anxiety about this. I've had anger as well because I am mad at all of the people who.
Oh, you can tell I'm perfectly calm about all this.
Yeah, I can tell. So let me read a little bit more from him. So he's saying all these people that they must find a way to provide for their needs. He says you can punish them for it and force them to live on savings for a while or to borrow, but sooner or later they'll have to pay those bills. So then what? Harsher measures? More and more intrusive and burdensome government controls over their choices? Punish till they obey. Now that's what they're doing in Italy, for example. In Italy, I heard that they are really imposing hardcore fines.
Who is the dictator who said shoot the people who violate that article, that linked article that'll be in the notes is a really good one. Of course, the government of Hungary has basically just become a dictatorship, right? The president of Thailand is basically, shutting down free speech and taking control of the entire economy there.
There's no trial by jury anymore right now in Scotland, I believe, or maybe other parts of UK.
Yeah. Israel shut down the courts, right? So at what point, right, do we let them get away with suspending civil liberties? At what point?
Indefinitely, right? Like if you say, okay, it's an emergency and right now we can't have trial by jury because the jurors are sitting in this little box and the blah, blah, blah. Okay, but for how long? And what sort of trials are you going to be ramming through without a jury under a pretext that you have to do it right away? Right? So all of this. I did a whole rant on Wednesday about how the politicians and the bureaucrats are starting to say transparency for thee and not for me, that the different League of Cities, all the different cities in California have been asking for the Freedom of Information transparency laws that apply to them to be suspended during this period so that they don't have to be accountable for how they're spending money or doing other things with the resources that
Because with all of these resources flooding in indiscriminately at will, there's not going to be any waste or abuse. Oh, no way. There isn't going to be any suspicious spending when you throw trillions and trillions of dollars at something. No, can't imagine that. Who could believe that would ever happen?
Yes, yes. And then Sandifer continuing, he says, yeah, we can all hold our breath for a while, but that is exactly what we're doing. We absolutely must be prepared to let them engage in economic productivity and a lot of it to work off the debts we're racking up here.
Obviously,
Yes.
we're only digging ourselves into a hole and then saying you can't use shovels for a while.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And that's what they're doing. And it's worse, right? Because again, my whole premise was this has to be a limited time with a definite exit strategy where you show, look, they're really trying to get you back to work.
Yeah.
And they're not.
And I
They're
think
not.
we both agree. Don't get me wrong. I think listening to my anger here, people might get the wrong idea. I am self-isolating. A
Yes.
good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, works at a county hospital here in San Diego where they had 3 members of the staff recently who tested positive and so everyone in the hospital is of course now wearing the masks, and there's all kinds of new things that are going on in terms of restrictions and everything there. And so I am very much aware. I do not want to be the negligent cause of my aging mother's death.
And you also don't want to get it yourself, right? Because
And
there's
I
too
don't
many
want to
wild
get it
cards.
myself, of course.
I know the 44-year-old David Latt, who was in ICU on ventilator, who thankfully now has been discharged.
Good. Yeah.
But that was a
Anytime
long.
someone goes into ICU on a ventilator, it is scary business.
No, and his lungs will probably be damaged for some time, if not permanently.
He may never breathe the same again.
Yeah. So, and he already had asthma before this, so
I take this very seriously, and I'm taking very dramatic steps in my own life to do something about it. On the other hand, I still have to. In fact, this is the moment when we have to, Amy. We have to stand up and object as the governments of the world are seizing more and more power.
Yes.
It's got, I mean, every time there's a war, every time there's a crisis, every time there's an economic crisis, every time there's a disease, government will use the opportunity, whether it's World War II, World War I, the Great Depression, you name it, it's a moment for the government to seize control. And then when the crisis recedes, the controls are still there.
Exactly. And that is what they are doing almost to
one good example in our lifetimes, 9/11, right? We had since
Patriot
the 1970s.
Act.
Right, exactly. We had the foreign surveillance court since the 70s, but boy, their powers were amplified after 9/11, right? And so what do we have? Abuse of the FISA courts almost immediately occurred. And same thing is going to happen here. We're going to have dramatic new government powers, which will inevitably be abused. But that won't get rid of them.
Yes. Yes. Tim Sandifer continuing, he says, people point to 1919 and they say, hey, there was economic recovery after the Spanish flu. And he says, sure, there was. Our economy was much, much freer then. Right? You can come back more quickly after something like this if the economy is freer. It's been decades since then, actually a century since then, and we are much less free now. So our resilience is damaged right now. He says today we have
better in those days to get economic, and nor did we have the total economic shutdown.
Yes,
so it's totally not analogous. It's true, millions of people died from the 1919 Spanish flu thing, but there was nothing we could really do about it. And the economy was certainly not shut down.
Right. He says, today we have so much obstructionism to economic growth, and both parties are deeply ideologically opposed to what economic growth requires. Sink that in. People, you guys who are Trump supporters, it's true about him as well. And he has not helped the situation with his tariffs, which, that would be a thing to really kind of lift and take a burden off an economy right now. But
Refuses to
no,
lift the
yeah,
burden. So
right.
American consumers are paying higher prices, even for medical stuff, thanks to his refusal to make an exception for tariffs in this COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah. And he says they're deeply ideologically opposed to what economic growth requires. And he lists them. He says free trade, low tariff barriers, reducing licensing and zoning regulations, etc. He says that I very much fear what is to come. Long-term, sustained command and control, wasteful government make work projects, which they're in the process of trying to do this whole infrastructure thing, right?
Exactly.
He says inflation, cartelization, common good substituting for the Constitution, all that stuff. And he says, it is, of course, absolutely true that doing nothing or letting people die would be extremely bad for the economy. He says, I have yet to encounter a single person who advocates either of those things.
Right.
He says, rather, in every other thing we've encountered, decentralized decision-making through individual choice and innovation has proven itself superior to addressing challenges than one-size-fits-all top-down government command and control.
Amen.
Yes. And
amen. Well
from
said.
what I understand, Germany has done fairly well. And one of the things that made a difference in Germany during this crisis was that they apparently have a decentralized healthcare system such that you had an individual area, obviously it's relative, but individual doctors in the separate areas making more decisions. So you could think of, for instance, our school system before Common Core or whatever, where you had local school boards and stuff that were making more decisions about what was going on in schools. And then you could at least have the chance to deliver a decent quality education.
I simply cannot understand the exact opposite is what a lot of people are arguing. We can't do this on a state-by-state basis. We can't let individuals have any choice. We have to have a single federal uniform guideline imposed from the top. Otherwise, we'll never get past this. I can't. It's like insane to me, because it's like flies in the face of any real empirical science, right? It's like, I don't want to know. And my religious dogmatic assumption is that an authoritarian response is required if we're ever going to get a handle on this. Wow.
Yes. Yes. Then he talks about this issue of risk. And there's a certain thing that Benjamin Shays had written on his blog that will be called into your mind when you hear this one. He says also, again, continuing with Timothy Sandifer's great thread on Twitter, he says also, it's simply not possible to set the threshold of acceptable risk at 0.
Amen.
The only way to accomplish that would literally be suicide.
Right.
The only viable option, as the AEI report says, and he links to it, is to ease into reopening swiftly while maintaining safety controls. And this is the sort of thing I envisioned, that you would have maybe 2-3 weeks of some sort of a lockdown that was made necessary, again, because government already messed this up. But then government is allowing the testing to ramp up so that we have the information that we need to do something exactly like this, where you're reopening everything quickly. You're being very clear and transparent to everyone about what you're doing to get the hell out of the way, to let the producers come in and solve the problems in the best way possible.
Really, it's astonishing. Anything good that the government has done in the last couple of months has really been, in effect, deregulatory in nature.
Yes.
Allowing, doctors to practice across state lines.
But then they get so much applause for it.
Right. And rather than seeing it that way, rather than saying, hey, wait a minute here, all these ridiculous rules were the thing that was, preventing us, New York from getting respirators or people from getting tested. No, they see it just the opposite. Thank God we have a strong central government to command these things into being. No, the only good they've really done is to get the government regulations out of the way so we can get more testing and more medical services and more doctors and more respirators and more masks to the extent that they have.
Yes, exactly. So continuing, he says, the idea of telling Walmart it can't sell makeup, or cutting off people's water, or sending the National Guard after people, and all this stuff I keep hearing is just not called for. Most of all, the attitude that it's wrong to worry about the economics, or that we can worry about all that later, damn, that's dangerous, has got to stop. A
Mhm.
scorched earth strategy, let alone a nationwide one, is much more than just risky, it seems to me. And he says, here's my fear. What happens when people get tired of being bossed around by these officials telling them their needs aren't essential and start violating the law? Do we send people with guns after them?
Right.
That's the
Well,
question. And do
California
we do
has a
that in America, for
right.
example?
California, Gavin Newsom issued the rule, what was it, yesterday, that said everyone who deals with the public has to wear a mask, and I'll advise the everyone who steps out of their home to wear a mask. So the next step will be everyone will have to wear a mask.
Yeah, and right now I don't have any masks on me really.
See, that's it.
Yeah, so I have to start sewing out of whatever I can find just so that I can conform my conduct with the law. And
Right.
again,
But astonishing that that's the law, right? That we're getting to the point now when people are being told they have to wear masks if they go out in public.
yeah, and from what I understand, unless you're in a poorly ventilated place for a certain period of time, then your main concern is you don't get within 6 feet, and particularly don't let somebody cough on you.
Right.
Um,
I
that
heard
yeah, there
a
is an aerosolization or
Yeah,
whatever,
there was
but
a good epidemiologist I was reading on this subject, and they were saying, look, it really requires repeated or prolonged exposure, even within that 6 feet, to get it airborne. Your odds of getting it airborne are, without repeated or prolonged exposures, are much less than, say, touching something, a surface that has the virus on it, and then touching your eyes, nose, or mouth. So wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. He was
yes.
saying that's by far the most effective thing, because he even estimated that something like 90% of the transmission happens from people touching things and then touching their face.
Yes. And then the other, most of the 10% is probably the coughing.
Right.
And yeah, if you're stuck in a New York subway,
Yeah. See, it's that tight, closed, prolonged exposure that an elevator or a subway would do.
yes. So I'm looking at our YouTube chat over here, and Josh Yokella is there, and he is very familiar with the effect of some of these constraints on the New Hampshire economy and on him personally, because again, I don't know if you know the situation of state legislators in New Hampshire, they aren't paid. And so he is working as a legislator and then also has to support himself, and the
His
various
day
ways he
job, right?
supports himself have been clamped down on
Wow.
during this time.
Wow.
And so this is a serious problem. And again, if you've got a state government, I mean, New Hampshire's the live free or die state. You would expect
Yeah.
less of this than anywhere else. But, to the extent that the governors are thinking that they can just shut everything down for an indefinite period,
They have
and
no idea how an economy works, how
no,
delicate the chains are, and how things build one on another. Um, it's insane. The idea that somehow you could just sort of pause everything, for a month, and then just go back in there and still have a V-shaped recovery because everything is all waiting just as it was before, is totally unrealistic. It is economic madness. And it is, like I say, we've trained into our young, into our public, a total blindness to the importance, to the survival, life-giving properties of economic activity. To
yes,
them, it's just for profit. To them, it's just, you can just command it into existence.
no, no. And they are not keeping up with their side of the bargain. They have, and their controls have been responsible for this. But as always, government thinks that it's going to solve the problems created by controls by imposing even more
More,
controls. The answer for them is,
always.
and because why, it's like the whole thing about if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
So the only thing the government is, and this is the one thing that I thought that Ron Paul's candidacy for president was most useful for, was reminding everybody during during the debates, that government is force, that
Right.
every time that it's getting involved, it's through force.
Right.
That's all it has in
All it
terms
can
of
do.
tools.
Right.
And so that needs to be used quite sparingly if it's going to be used morally.
Right.
And
Right.
you can say our context today is all messed up, but they are not using it sparingly. They are
For
jumping on.
for the government to have more than the power of the gun and force, that would mean that our politicians would have to be leaders that people had, put credibility in. trusted and believed. You know, there is something to saying, well, look, I can't trust Trump. And so why should I believe what he says one way or another? But I was listening to Democrats. It's not like I feel better about them. They're,
Yeah.
in fact, blinder in a way to the economic needs. Not that either of them really understand the necessity of economic production,
Right.
survival, and the COVID response, mind you. But they've showed no awareness of that at all. As I say, that I think is really the revealing thing here, is how totally blunt. We wonder why young people are socialists, right, in greater numbers today. It's because everyone really, except us, it seems, the objectivist world, fails to appreciate the importance of economic production, the life-sustaining quality of economic production, how that makes everything else possible.
Yeah, earlier you were talking about how there was the reaction from the leftists, and then you were, I think, going to go on and say, well, even the people on the right,
Yeah,
are
yeah.
also,
Trump
but
and Fauci. I was sort of distressed at the
yeah,
standards they were imposing. Of course,
so
not
I'm
a
going to say
single
the
eye.
leftists and the other
The
leftists,
other leftists, although
right?
the whole variety of socialists.
The whole variety of statists is what we should
Statists,
start
yes,
calling them, right? Because
that
it's
is
hard
true.
to, I don't know that any of these definitions, except for statism,
Well, when you have
apply.
Trump ordering General Motors and 3M in peacetime to do certain production things, that's the fascist model of economic organization, right? Not the Nazis and the fascists didn't, publicly take over, nationalize, and name all the industries, but they regulated them to the extent that those companies were merely extensions of the state. And when a president of the United States uses war powers to tell GM what to do and to tell 3M what to do, then we were living currently, to that extent, under a fascist model of economic organization.
Yes. And, to liken this to a war, why has it even gotten to this state? It's actually his fault. The war should be not against the virus, but against government encroachment and overreach. And
It's so funny. Trump was saying, now I know COVID is far more contagious than regular influenza, and I know it's even deadlier. I'm not sure
Sure.
how much deadlier.
Sure.
But the funny thing is that Trump was even saying in one of his recent conferences that the deaths so far in 2020 from regular flu are almost at 50,000 now, he was saying. And COVID has now broken the 5,000 mark for this year, right? Right? So regular flu has killed 10 times the number of people this year.
Yes. And, again, one of the differences that make the difference, and I saw a tweet about this the other day, people talk about, well, imagine a world with no vaccines, and they think it would be better with no vaccines. Here's the world without one vaccine, and we're all freaking out. Now,
so someone asked on a page today, what is the objectivist position on vaccines? My response, I thought, was kind of pithy. I said, well, I'm selfish, so I don't want to get sick or spread disease, and I'm rational, so I know that the benefits usually far outweigh the risks.
Yeah. Now, actually, think about this. So, in all my, and we'll zoom over to the topic of the actual GI analogy in a minute. But I'm reminded of one of my GI doctors. I've seen actually 4 GI doctors throughout this. Plus, I've been consulting with other people, and I'm gonna have a whole reading list for you and everybody else. Well, most of them I only saw very briefly, and then there's one that I'm keep going back to. But in any event, one of them, bless his soul, he was actually made unable to walk because he was given a flu vaccine.
Oof.
Way back some decades ago. I guess, they've obviously gotten safer and better over time.
And they do have risks. I don't mean to say that they don't have risks. Everything that
this was
put a shot in your arm with is going to have a risk somewhere.
Some decades ago, but he now walks with a cane. He's recovered to a certain extent, but this was because of a vaccination. And nonetheless, he does continue to recommend vaccinations to his patients. But I am really looking forward to the day, and we've seen like a few months ago, there was a article that Amish Adalja was sharing, and it was that there's going to be a single unified flu vaccine, one that you can get once or maybe once in a booster for your entire life. And this is the ideal, that you don't have to keep courting that tiny amount of risk in order. But, you know, people have at least some choice to say, okay, I can get the season's flu vaccine, or I can go around and just sort of assume that the flu virus is everywhere. And if I want to avoid it, I have to do everything that we're doing now in the COVID era, right? So, you know, wash hands and keep distance and all those sorts of things.
You know, what decides it for me is it's true, it should be voluntary, but what decides it for me is not only don't I want to get sick, I don't want the people I love, or the people I have most contact with, I don't want to make them sick.
Exactly.
It's just however I look at it from my own selfish perspective, but it should be voluntary, of course.
Do you get the flu vaccine each year then?
Yeah, I do.
I would have this year, except for all my other illness. So,
and I'm glad I did. You know, I really, in retrospect, I'm glad I got the flu vaccine last fall. So.
Oh no, definitely. I mean, I've been just going around already being fairly careful this whole season because I felt like I wasn't ready to get a flu vaccine. I kept waiting. Okay, when my weight goes up, I'll get the flu vaccine. And then it just got so late that I never did. And then here I am. But no, I have gotten it some years and not other years. And, you know, you're saying, okay, well, it's a predictive thing. They're trying to predict what the virus is going to actually mutate and look like. And so you get this cocktail of whatever they think is the most
and
likely
it's
to do
getting very
some good.
sophisticated. The science of that is getting sophisticated. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if they could just give you one shot?
Well, and supposedly that's on the horizon. Supposedly that's on the horizon.
Bugs to be taken care of. Yeah, really cool.
But there's obviously, you know, at the time you might say, well, if there is a single flu vaccine, then all these companies that were making money giving us a new one each year, what are they going to do? They're going to help us with COVID now. And there's probably going to be other things later for them to do. There's plenty of work to help keep us healthy. And, you know, who knows? I think there are other things that we could potentially, we're going to discover a lot with this whole gut health thing that people are starting to go into now. I think there are other things that put us at risk that if they could vaccinate us for those, a lot of the gut problems could be avoided down the road too, because a lot of this is caused initially by virus. And in fact, you know, if some people look at the title of our show today, the COVID-induced dysbiosis, I don't know if you've read, no, but there is actually some direction in which COVID goes in certain people. And they're, you know, again, they're learning so much they don't know exactly how it's going to behave in any given person. And some people, they end up losing their sense of smell and taste and other things. And other people's, it goes straight to a respiratory problem. Some people are getting headaches and nausea, and some people are having hardcore digestive issues. So they might think that we're doing a technical show on COVID-induced dysbiosis, but you know, the dysbiosis again that I had in mind was this economic metaphor, metaphor for the economy per se. But
well, yeah, and the analogy is really good, because when we get sick, it's very frequently our own body's immune response that hurts us or kills us. You know, a fever or the inflammation.
Well, the fever is apparently good, right? So if you were to get the COVID and you had a fever, apparently you should let it go up to at least a certain point, because the fever in your body helps to kill the thing.
Right. It also hurts you. And people have died from having high fevers.
Well, no. So you have to keep a balance, right?
And the truth is, the lungs fill with fluid and get inflamed, right? That's an autoimmune response.
Right.
So it's our autoimmune responses, even more than the disease itself, that can cause the complications and death. And let me suggest that that's a perfect analogy for our reaction, our economic reaction to COVID-19. It's our reaction to it that may cause far more damage than the disease itself.
Right. No, it's
sort of our autoimmune reaction.
Yes. It's a perfect analogy. And
I keep touching my face. You know, the camera, it's wild.
We're allowed to touch our face at home.
At home. And I wash my hands all the time. You know, my mother my mother tried to train me as a kid not to touch my face. She was an actress in Hollywood as a kid. And so her mother always told her, you can't touch your own hair and your own face. So my mother's got really good discipline about not touching, you know, because she was told from childhood she wasn't qualified to touch her own face.
Oh yeah, no, I'm super
and so she trained that into me. But now I notice, I'm looking at the camera here, and I just notice how often I touch my face. I do it all the time. I rub my eyes, rub my nose, I wipe my mouth. It's crazy. We have to be more aware of that.
No, I'm usually pretty conscious of, well, you know, women, we put a little bit of eye makeup on. We don't want to smear it. I'm not going to touch, right?
Right.
But yeah, you know, we try to be aware. I used to have the ring in my nose, so I was very conscious of not bumping that like all the
Right.
time. And for
Right.
a while when I took it out, I was still pretending as if I had it in, you know, because you don't want to knock that damn thing. So, you know, it goes like that. But no, so then I want to draw your analogy out even further,
Uh-huh.
James, if you don't mind. So,
Sure.
you know, there are people who I understand have suffered even more, and it's because they have an immune system that is prone to overreacting. And similarly, we have governments with statism and all the statist mechanisms entrenched for so many decades that it is prone
See,
to
the
overreacting.
correct response, right, is an immune system that has a targeted response. Develops
Yes.
the antibodies that can target diseases like this. When it gets the new
Yes.
disease, you want your antibody immune system to be working really well. And that
Yes.
having that compromised can kill you too. But
Yes.
otherwise, it's the overreaction of an immune system, and it's usually compromised or impaired immune systems that will overreact with a higher than expected fever, or with the pneumonia where your lungs swell and fill with fluid.
Exactly. Exactly. So in YouTube now, they're saying there's the solution. You need to start wearing eye makeup. Okay. And then you won't touch your eyes. Yeah. Pretty funny. Oh, the malaria drug supposedly suppresses the immune system. So all the dots are connecting.
That's it. That's it.
Um,
Some suppression of the immune system. That's how quinine works with malaria. So hydrochlora, whatever, is really just a way of suppressing our immune response, so that our
So
lungs
the diet
stay warm.
tonic that I've been drinking, because already Rob Wolf was telling me a little bit about it. I haven't had it for several days right now, just because I think it was not agreeing with me very well. Quinine has side effects, by the way.
Right, right. It
And
does.
I'm a very sensitive
But
person right now.
it's a mild immune suppressor. That's why they
Okay.
give it to malaria patients, because
Right.
again, it's the fever in our body's reaction to the malaria that's going to kill us. So they would give standard treatment in the tropics for malaria for a long time was quinine, because it's this mild immunosuppressant.
Beautiful. Okay, so now we're connecting the dots. And one thing that we've learned in several decades is that a lot of our immune system is regulated by our gut, right?
Right.
And so, you know, we could talk a little bit now about the gut stuff if towards the end of the show here, if you're amenable to that,
Get to the
James.
gross stuff.
Well, I try not to get too gross about it.
Good.
No, but you know, so I had some test results that came back, and they came back pretty late because of all the backlog I'm sure that these different labs
Yeah.
are having and everything.
Yeah.
And so, not surprisingly, I found out that I do have some sort of dysbiosis. In fact, I have an entire phylum that is missing from my gut that is in a healthy gut. It's called the Actinobacteria phylum. And it's a pretty purple line on the test result for a healthy person. And that pretty purple line is missing entirely from my results.
So
So
how
I
does
do,
one get that back into their gut?
I don't know. And actually, from what I understand, so I'm going to give you a list of the people who I think are essential reading on the gut. And I'll stick this all in some program notes too, with, you know, handy dandy Amazon affiliate links for people. If you could find it of use later, go to my blog at don'tletitgo.com. And I appreciate all the support you can do. If you're buying through Amazon, you buy through my link, you're not going to pay any more, but you will help support me, which I appreciate and love. So it is Rob Wolf in the first instance. I had respected his work on paleo and have been connected to him for years. And he has the latest is Wired to Eat, I believe. He's got paleo solution, but then he refers me to Chris Kresser. And Chris Kresser, I think his is called the Paleo Code, or no, Personal Paleo Code, something like that. But he has a tailored, personalized approach to paleo. It's very reasonable and good. And he is very knowledgeable about gut things too, it turns out. So you circle back to him. Through Chris Kresser, I found Norm Robillard. And Norm Robillard is the fast track diet guy who talks about the fermentation potential of carbs. he's got a whole series of fast track diet books depending on what your particular ailment is, but I think any of them are useful. And then you end up going to think about carnivore, because you think of carnivore as the ultimate low fermentation diet. And it's also a hell of an elimination diet. It's very good for gut reset. Have you been doing that recently?
I'm not a total, but boy, see, I have a complex, unique case. I'm
Yeah,
not sure we want to get into the details of.
sure.
My GI doctor, just for one thing, has me on a certain kind of fiber, which
Ah,
I tell him, why can't I use non-carbohydrate based fiber? Like, no, doesn't have the same effects. So but I nonetheless, I want to get more and more and more onto a carnivore type diet because I really think it might help. And you're
yeah.
absolutely right. From what I understand, why have, so one friend of mine puts it, why compost your gut? If you don't put any compost in there, you don't need to compost your gut.
There you go. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's the fermentable carbs in
Right,
particular that are
right,
the
right.
problem. And it's probably whatever he's got you on fiber wise is probably high in fermentable carbs. Anyway, so then you get there. And then after that, you start, because basically what the carnivore diet or something like that will do is reset the gut. And maybe here's the one guy that you need to read now. Dr. Michael Ruscio. I think it's called Healthy Gut, Healthy You. And that's where I'm going now. And it's funny, I've been organically sort of going in this path, right?
Right.
So, I learned about, don't be on PPIs because it's just going to destroy your stomach acid and it's going to do this. And then it was like, well, what do you do diet wise? Okay, you go low fermentable carbs. Okay, well, how can you really do that and get rid of the triggers and figure it out? You go carnivore. And so I did that, and it kind of resets the gut. And then where do you go from there? So it turns out after you reset the gut, according to Ruscio, you try to support it. And you support it by having a three-pronged approach to probiotics. It's really two types of probiotics plus a beneficial yeast called S. boulardii. And it's very standard. You can find this stuff on Amazon, but I happen to take a probiotic. I have got no affiliate relationship. Otherwise, I'd try to exploit it. There's a company called Seed. And Seed, Chris Kresser worked with them, and they created this really awesome probiotic that is encapsulated. In the capsule is something designed to survive your stomach acid, but also it ends up feeding the beneficial bacteria with a prebiotic. It's in the capsule part itself, the material.
Boy,
And all
there's
the
smart. There's a smart
smart
supplement.
people. No, and
Yeah.
there's a capsule within the capsule, and you can see it.
Oh
And
wow.
it's a beautiful green. Besides, right? No, but the all the strains of the probiotics in it, they've tested them and stuff. So I said, okay, I'll go with this. So, but in addition to that, apparently you need this S. boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast. And it turns out that one of the results that I have is there's something called blastocystis or something. Blasto, people call it. And I've been going out and geeking out and just reading, and tons of people have this issue. I'm not unique, but I just wasn't aware of this whole world of people who have this. So this blasto stuff. And then the question is, well, do you treat it with herbal, antibacterials? Do you treat it with antibiotics? Maybe you don't treat it. And from what I understand, the combination of the good bacteria plus this beneficial yeast can be as effective as a certain type of antibiotic protocol in helping to wipe this out. Plus eating low
Wow.
carb, you starve it out a little
Right.
bit. So that's what I'm working with now. In addition, you can rebuild the gut. And this is the latest that Ruscio has, but it's not, I think, in his book. It's a supplement of immunoglobulin, which happens to be in colostrum supplements, which is something that's, again, gotten a lot of popularity lately. There's tons of colostrum supplements you can find online with Amazon. I sent you a link to one. That was not an affiliate link. I'm not trying to make money up. Yeah, I'm doing some of that now. And so I just started that, and I'm going to give it, apparently you wait for about 2 months to see the full benefit of a probiotic regime, although you're supposed to see benefits. And I have seen benefits of just the seed probiotic, which I've been taking for a few weeks now. So I'm waiting to see how that does. But, again, if you have this bizarre dysbiosis, it is potentially a long and painstaking process that you have to be deliberate about to rebuild. And it will bring it back, the analogy, to the economy, right? Which is that they are creating this huge dysbiosis. It's already there to a certain extent. And the longer it goes on without any plan or exit strategy or assurance, it's like if I went on to a really limited diet to reset my gut and it was all made of sugar, I would make things worse.
Much worse. Yeah.
If it was all fiber, I would make things worse.
Right,
It's like,
right,
I'm going to
right.
eat all veggies. I think it would get a lot more painful before it gets better. And that's the kind of thing that Tim Sandifer in his tweet is afraid of, that,
Right.
This diet of more government controls that were being put on as a result of the COVID-induced dysbiosis, which they were in part responsible for in the first place,
Right.
that it's going to make things worse before it could ever really get better. It's going to make us take a lot longer to get better, and that's unacceptable.
Yep.
So I wish you the best. And so, yeah, we
Thank
definitely hit me up and talk more, because
Yeah.
the Rusho stuff is really good. Actually, I'll send you a link. There's one podcast discussion between two of these guys. Rob Wolf says he thinks Chris Kresser is way smarter than him, but I tend to disagree. I think Rob is underselling himself, but I think Kresser just has a different focus and value orientation because he went through hardcore gut
Yeah.
problems when he traveled and got a whole bunch of bugs and everything. So he's been through it. But Kresser and Rusho talking about steps to take to improve gut health. And you might enjoy, just listen to that podcast.
Oh, I would. Yeah.
And then Rusho's book in combination with, I'll send you like that one video about the immunoglobulin stuff. But it seems that you do a reset diet. Again, I'm not a doctor. I've just been going out there trying to cure myself. A reset diet of some kind, followed by support in the form of the 3 prongs of probiotics, which I achieve through Chris Kresser's seed, which does 2 of the prongs, and the S. boulardii, which is the 3rd, doing those, and then the colostromin or immunoglobulin supplement for support that helps rebuild. And from there, you should be able to kind of reintroduce more normal foods. A wider range of foods that you can eat means more fun for me, more resiliency, because you're not dependent on one particular type of food. I like that direction myself. People have different philosophical attitudes towards it. So anyway, that's mine. Now, how do we make the analogy to that last with the economy? So we do a reset by getting government out of the way. Right. Get government out of the way.
Right.
We do support by us individually, because of our own moral compasses, going out and giving more business to the small businesses that start back up again, to all the entrepreneurs that have been getting themselves going online and stuff. I'm one of those. Come do my logic class if you want, by the way. I've still got a logic class. You can enroll in that. We had the first week this week, but people can enroll. So support small businesses and entrepreneurs everywhere as you can, as through that. And then hopefully we go back to a diverse and robust economy again.
Let's hope as soon as possible.
Definitely. So thank you. Thank you, James. I hope I didn't give you too much of a workout. You said to go easy on you, but I think you were actually being, hard on yourself. I don't know. You were certainly venting.
I was venting. I have to say, I was venting.
But with good reason today.
Yeah, I think it'll help stress management to vent a little.
I think it really does. I mean, at one point, I cried a little bit the other day. I was like, I needed to do this. That's it.
Yeah.
And let yourselves do this, people.
Yes. Let yourself cry if you need to cry.
Yeah. Meditation, sunshine, and sleep.
Yep.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.